Hi, I'm Chad with Move Forward Guitar. This lesson is from our series, How to Read Music for Guitar. In this lesson, I'm going to talk about articulations and ornaments in music notation. First off, if you like all the diagrams for this series, including the diagrams for this lesson, you can download our free e-guide, How to Read Music for Guitar. But I am working on it right now as I'm filming this lesson, so it might not be available as you're watching this lesson. If it is available, a link will pop up on the screen that'll allow you to download it. And like I said, it's free, so there's no reason not to download it when it is available. This is part 33 from our series, How to Read Music for Guitar. If you'd like to go back and start at the beginning, you can click the link on the screen. So like I said, I'm going to talk about articulations and ornaments. And an articulation specifies how a note should be played, and an ornament is specifying to actually modify the pitch pattern. And I'll explain more as we're going through. And we've already looked at an articulation, which is staccato. And if you remember from the lessons that we talked about staccato, that's when there's a dot below or above a note. And that means when you play that note, to create space in between it and the next note. So that's an articulation marking, that staccato mark, telling you what you should do with that note. It's how you play that note. And as we're going through this, I want to go over other articulations that you're going to come across so that you'll know what they mean when you see it. And I'm not going to go too in depth on exactly how to play it. I'm going to explain as best I can just by talking about it, but if you really want to know the techniques for different things, you can look that up on YouTube. I'll have other lessons in the future that actually show that, but in this lesson it's more just about reading music and what it means when you see that symbol. So the next one is an accent, and an accent is created by this symbol right here. It can be above or below the note. And accents are really important in music. It means to emphasize that note more, and usually when you're playing guitar, that means you're striking other notes a little softer, and then you're striking the accented note a little louder to bring more emphasis to that note. And in music, you create natural accents. It's just a natural thing to get an accent as you're playing the music. So in 4/4 time, you'd have a natural accent on the 1, which is the downbeat. And if you were to play a scale, you would find yourself naturally accenting that note. But there's going to be times when you want to accent other notes, and it's important for the piece and the sound of the piece to show you where to do that. The next articulations I'm going to show you are picking direction, and those are created by these symbols here. And this one represents a down pick, and this one represents an up pick, or downstroke and upstroke. And these are used for bowed instruments as well, but when you're talking about a guitar, that's a down pick or downstroke and an up pick or upstroke. And that can be important in different pieces of music because the way you pick your note creates a different sound. Although the place you may see it the most is when you're looking at some sort of exercise that's teaching you a picking pattern. For example, if it was teaching you alternate picking or some other type of picking that is really important to get down for a technique, you'll run across that a lot. And you'll run across it in tab as well, not just in music notation. Then the last articulation I'm going to show you for now, I'm going to show more in another lesson. In this lesson, I'm showing you ones you'll run across the most, will be a fermata. And that's this right here, which is this little bird's eye looking thing. And a fermata means that it's up to you to hold the note for the duration you choose. So normally this is a quarter note, and in 4/4 time that would just get 1 beat and you'd move on. But when you have a fermata above it, it's telling you that you can hold this out for as long as you feel. So you hold it out and you're pretty much creating a type of pause in the music where it's kind of freezing around that note, and you can hold that for as long as you feel in that piece and then move on to the next note and everything comes back into time. So just be aware if you see that's what you're doing. That's telling you you have control over how long this note is held out. Next, we're going to look at some ornaments. And ornaments, like I said, are actually changing the pitch patterns of the notes. With articulations, it's telling you how to play a note. With ornaments, you usually have other notes involved that are creating some sort of pattern. For example, if you see something like this, it says TR, that means a trill. And a trill, you would play this note and another note, and you'd hammer on and pull off really fast to create a trill. So it's basically like a hammer on and pull off combined, but a bunch of them and done pretty fast. Depending on the tempo of the music will determine exactly how fast you do it, and it's kind of a feel thing, but that's what you're doing. And typically what you're doing is you're playing the note that's written and then the next note up in the scale, whether that's a half step or a whole step. And there's multiple schools of thought on which note you pick first, whether you would pick this note that's shown first and then hammer on to the next note and then pull off, hammer on, pull off, or if you would start with the next note up in the scale and then pull off to this note first. And I'm not going to really get into that in this lesson. you can do some research on your own to study the different schools of thought. But basically, you're just taking this note and the next note up in the scale, doing hammer-ons and pull-offs, and doing it pretty quickly, and the length of it is usually more random, but there can also be ones where you actually do a set amount of trills. And there's multiple ways that you'll see a trill marked. You can see it with just a TR like this, or you could see a squiggly line drawn like that after the TR, and that means the same thing, that you're doing a trill. The next ornament we're going to look at is called a grace note, and that would be right here in this. It's this little note. You can see it's smaller than the other notes, and it has this little line through it. That's a grace note. And what that's telling you to do is to play it really fast right before this note, and you subtract it from the amount of this note. So these two notes combined are still going to equal this quarter note. So wherever the grace note is, the amount of time that the two notes take up together, so if the grace note's right before a quarter note, the time is still going to equal a quarter note. The note values of these two notes together are still going to equal a quarter note. If the grace note was before here, the grace note plus this note would still equal a half note, etc. So it's just a little ornament, the way to spice up a note, to add in a note that's really fast right before it. And another thing that you'll hear different schools of thoughts on is whether this note is played on the beat, so right on where this beat would actually be is where you would start this grace note, or if it's played right before where this beat starts, and this actual quarter note or whatever note you're going into would be where the beat is. So there's different schools of thought on that, and you can do research on your own to do some study on that as well. And then one more marking that I'm going to show you that's not really an articulation or an ornament is called an arpeggiation. And that's this marking right here. And you're going to see an arpeggiation in front of a chord because it's arpeggiating a chord. So before we talked about how chords are written where there's 3 or more notes stacked on top of each other, which is what's happening right here. If you see this little squiggly line to the left of it, it means to arpeggiate the chord. So instead of just playing the chord with all the notes together, you separate the notes out. So it's also called a broken chord. And usually you're doing it from the lowest note to the highest note, and you just play each note really quickly and let them all ring out together. So it's still a chord. You're not really playing the notes separately. You're letting them all ring out together, but you're distinctly able to hear each note instead of just all notes hit at the same time. And you could see a little arrow either going down or up on this squiggly line representing the arpeggiation, and that would tell you which way to arpeggiate. So if it's pointing down, you'd actually go from the highest note to the lowest note. If it's pointing up, you go from the lowest note to the highest note. But typically if it doesn't have an arrow, you're going from the lowest note to the highest note as well. So if you saw this chord, which is an A minor chord, which is A, C, E, instead of hitting all those notes at the same time, you would quickly pick A, then C, then E, but let them all ring out together. And like I said, these aren't all the articulation and ornament markings that you'll see. I'll have another lesson that go into more, but these are the most important for now, I think, and the ones you're going to come across a little more often. So that's an explanation of articulations and ornaments. Go ahead and move on to the next lesson where I'm going to talk about tuplets. And be sure to download the e-guide. All the diagrams are in there, and be sure to subscribe because we had at least one new lesson every day.